topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Ask the Expert show, where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. We do most of our shows by either city or by state, but this topic that we're doing for the next 50 minutes is so important. We have made it a national show. We promote it to the entire United States. It's that important. And then we also replay it again each month. So it's actually our live show today. This show will be replayed again next month. And it is, I never realized how important this show is until we start getting it. I was talking to our attorney, Michael Mandelbrot, today about this, that we have got more law firms that specialize in the area of asbestos and mesothelioma. And we have been getting calls from other practices around the country who listen to the show. That alone is a compliment. But the fact that they also wanted to do a show, but we strictly do the show with Michael for the entire country. Good afternoon, Michael.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for the introduction. I'm always happy to be here. And, you know, I appreciate that. There are a number of other related and similar torts out there that I think your listeners would be interested in as well. And I think you're a great host to host those podcasts. So I've got some really good recommendations for you in some upcoming legal ones that I'm sure lawyers would be very competitive in looking at. But we're here to talk about mesothelioma and asbestos disease. So,
and you know what, Michael, I got to tell you from the letters that we get, people appreciate how you break it down, how you explain things. But normally, and we get so many emails, and I got to tell you, usually a competing practice will downplay the expert, that they're better than them. But these practices that have contacted us, that though they were sad they couldn't do a show themselves, they really complimented you on the content that you're giving out. And I just thought that was just such a great compliment to your practice.
Well, it is a compliment, and I really thank you for that. And for those lawyers who are listening, who are my competitors, you know, and always you can call me as well. But thank you for that, and thank you for the compliment. I'm happy to help anybody with any asbestos disease, not just mesothelioma.
Michael, tell people about your practice.
Thanks, I appreciate that. For the past 30 years, I have been representing victims of asbestos-related diseases. There are a number of different diseases caused by exposures to asbestos and asbestos-containing products. Asbestos was used extensively throughout the country. It was something that was mined, and it was a fiber that was inserted in literally hundreds of different products up until 1975. And as a matter of fact, it was just banned in the United States in 2024, which there's still a lot of controversy about just last year. But what we learned as lawyers in the mid 70s and early 80s was that not only did asbestos cause some very serious diseases, as well as a very fatal cancer known as mesothelioma, but that these companies who made, sold, supplied, and distributed asbestos products had tested their workers and knew that these products were causing very significant diseases. And they concealed the information. And as a result of that, I have, in essence, dedicated my practice to representing these victims of asbestos-related diseases. And when I say asbestos-related diseases, there is asbestosis, which is a very serious, we'll call it a scarring of the lungs caused by exposure to asbestos. That can be a terminal disease. We are talking about lung cancer. Even people who smoked cigarettes but were also exposed to asbestos, it is very possible that their lung cancer was caused by either the synergistic effects of cigarettes and asbestos or just asbestos. We're talking about other cancers, colorectal cancers, laryngeal cancers. But of course, we're also talking about what I'll call the big gorilla, and that is mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a terminal cancer to the lining, typically of the lungs, which is plural mesothelioma, and it can also be to the lining of the abdomen. And again, it is not a cancer to the abdomen or the lungs, it is a lining. It is to the lining. There is no treatment for either of these, the peritoneal mesothelioma or the pleural mesothelioma, or people just say mesothelioma. There's no treatment for those. There is a variety of different experimental treatments, we will call them, but nothing that can cure mesothelioma. And typically when somebody is diagnosed, unfortunately, their life expectancy is 6 months or less. So that is a little bit about me. I am a plaintiff's lawyer who is dedicated to representing victims of asbestos-related diseases, including, of course, mesothelioma.
So you're basically telling us, which is so sad, Michael, that your clients usually do not live.
That is true, and you know, it's one of the hardest things I think about my practice. And when I was younger, I used to travel around the country a lot and take these videotape depositions of, it was almost always mesothelioma victims, because the reason they were being videotaped was because these people were so sick and they couldn't travel.
Oh, that's
and
right.
You know, here I was at that time relatively young and healthy, and I would look at these people, and every time I just remember that moment of leaving after the deposition concluded and knowing that was the last time I was going to ever see that person. And you know, it was a tough thing, and it's something that you actually never get used to. I'm going through, I've got a client who has mesothelioma who is really going downhill right now, and we're rushing to take his deposition. And it is, it's just really tragic, because were it not for the exposures to asbestos, these people would still be here. And so that is one of the unfortunate truths of my case, is that many of our clients do expire relatively quickly. Sure, some do live a year, 2 years. I've got a client who I have talked about, Vito Mirabile, who's not doing well,
Yes.
but he's been around for about 4 years. And so, yes, I guess the long answer to your question is absolutely.
Well, one of the things I noticed that a lot of these firms that say they specialize in this area, but you look at other areas they do, and it'd be bankruptcy, criminal law, personal injury, estate. Michael, this is all you do. This is
This
the
is it.
only area of law you concentrate.
This is it. No car accidents. No product liability. I don't represent insurance companies, no bankruptcy, but, I see that on lawyers' websites too. And it's funny because we have a very big conference coming up soon where all of the lawyers in my field typically congregate, or usually the lawyers who are sort of dedicated, even if they do have some small other areas of practice. These guys aren't at that conference. Those ads that you see with the bankruptcy and then mesothelioma out of the blue
Yes.
in their ad, they're just hoping that somebody calls them with mesothelioma so they can send that case off to a firm like mine or one of these other firms and earn a very big referral fee on referring the cases. But in terms of representing the victims, yeah, no. These people usually aren't on the map if they've got 7 areas of practice and one of those is mesothelioma.
I noticed there were some of these firms that contacted us want to get into this area. That was one of the things. But here's something else that people might not realize. You do so much work and you don't even realize a dime until your case is settled. Isn't that correct?
That is true, but not only that, since all our cases are handled on a contingency,
Right.
we, in no case do we ever get any money 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road. But even on the flip side of that, oftentimes we might spend a lot of money in investigating a case and medically working up a case to determine if somebody has a significant enough disease to qualify for compensation, and oftentimes they don't. And so we might spend a lot of money to try and assist people, and we might recover nothing. In those cases you're talking about, yes, the money is never instant. There's never a settlement right out of the chute. There are ways, maybe within 60 to 90 days, assuming we've gotten all the medical records, we can get them some compensation. But oftentimes you're looking at a year, 18 months, maybe 2 years before you see significant settlements in a case. But sometimes less in a mesothelioma case. Don't get me wrong. If those cases are moving quickly, like this individual who I mentioned, we filed the case less than 4 months ago. His deposition is coming up in a week, and his trial date is like in a month and a half. After, if he can make it through his deposition, there's no barriers from that point until trial. And I would expect a lot of the defendants to come to the table to try and resolve that case before the trial. So in that case, maybe he might, start seeing money within 6 to 9 months. But there always is a considerable amount of time, investment, and sometimes that investment, while it doesn't necessarily pay off, I'd rather know that somebody doesn't have a case than file a case for somebody who later it turns out they don't have an asbestos disease and I've spent the money filing a case. So yeah, we often do spend a lot of money, time, energy before we recover anything.
I think if someone settled early that they probably left a lot of money on the table.
Well, it's sort of one of those catch-22s, because in this litigation, you end up seeing a lot of the same defendants over time, because there wasn't thousands of companies that made these asbestos products. Say there was 200 or 300 who are active in this litigation. And if somebody is, worked around drywall their whole life, you might have sued USG, for example, in their case, settled it. And then you've got another client who also was a drywaller and worked with USG. And then you'll see USG in another case. So oftentimes the good thing is you can get, especially if you've been in the field for a while, get a history with a lot of these defendants, which sometimes can lead to an earlier settlement. But that's those defendants who are in multiple cases. And, I mentioned that on a very small level, but the Johns Manville, which is, who was at once a defendant, is now an asbestos trust. They have received 1 million claims to this point, is my understanding.
Wow.
Since their inception in the late 1980s or maybe early 1990s. So it shows you that one company exposed more than 1 million people to asbestos, just that one. And same with a lot of these other companies as well, who are in every shipyard and power plant and refinery and all over the country. And so, it's not like there's an unlimited number of companies that we go after. So thankfully, we do see some of the same companies over and over, and oftentimes getting a history against them can lead to an earlier settlement. But you're right. That term, leaving money on the table, you hear it all the time. Did you leave any money on the table by settling early and not pushing them to trial? Sure.
Michael, we've talked on the show before about the movie Aaron Brockovich. And that is, I don't know if it's 80% true, 70% true, but the thing I got out of it was there were so many people who were sick but didn't have any idea that their sickness, their health was from, poor water. And is it the same way? I mean, I'm thinking people are driving in their car right now and they're going, I've had pain in the chest, I've had breathing problems. How does a person know if they've, have mesothelioma or asbestos?
Great question. I think the big one, and I guess the answer to your question is absolutely yes. There are people driving around, people who are listening to this show, who themselves or maybe one of their family members may have been diagnosed with an asbestos-related disease, and they never knew. And I get calls like that all the time. Like, my grandfather died of lung cancer 20 years ago, and he worked in the shipyards. Would he qualify? Absolutely, he would have qualified, but now, since it's been 20 years, there's a statute, oftentimes, let's say a 3-year statute of limitations. Some states are less, from time of death, from time of diagnosis. The big diseases that I see lung cancer for me is the huge one, because anytime somebody's diagnosed with lung cancer, the first thing every doctor, every physician points to, and again, if they were diagnosed with lung cancer, it means they had a biopsy, a pathology report, and there was a lung cancer diagnosis. The doctor then determines, hey, what could have caused this? And the first thing every doctor or personal physician I've ever seen will point to in a lung cancer case, you can guess what it is, Steve. What do you think they point to in a lung cancer case? Did you ever smoke cigarettes?
Yes.
That's the first thing they will ask a client. And if somebody ever smoked, they're not even going to look to see whether or not they were exposed to asbestos. these doctors are gonna immediately point to the cigarette smoking and say, well, probably caused by smoking, and tell the family, well, he smoked, cigarettes cause lung cancer. Well, never telling the family, hey, it could have also been caused by asbestos if they were a blue collar worker working in the refineries, power plants, shipyards, construction sites, you name it, any of those. And you think of how many people have been diagnosed, not just with lung cancer, but other cancers also related to or caused by asbestos. And then you even think of those who I think had asbestosis and they were, had breathing problems. And it's the same thing. If the doctor says, well, did you ever smoke? There's a disease that I see all the time, and you see commercials about it, COPD.
Yes.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That is a disease caused by smoking, typically, COPD.
Right.
Okay? And the symptoms are nearly identical to somebody who's got asbestosis. Nearly identical. Breathing problems. Right? You have difficulty breathing, but there are very subtle ways to tell the difference whether or not those breathing problems are caused by asbestos or more likely caused by smoking. But as I've seen, if somebody's got breathing problems and they go to a doctor and they've got a history of smoking and they present with the symptoms of COPD, which are also the symptoms of asbestosis, the doctors always have COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I bet there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I would hope, and I'm pretty certain that in today's medical community, that if someone's diagnosed with mesothelioma, these typically the pathologists, these internal medicine doctors, they know that mesothelioma is only caused by asbestos. But these other diseases, lung cancer, colorectal cancer, laryngeal cancer, they're going to point to smoking every time in a laryngeal cancer case without even investigating asbestos. And of course, the asbestosis cases, which I just talked about. So I'm sure there have been thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people misdiagnosed and ended up passing away thinking, my grandfather died of lung cancer from cigarette smoking, without even realizing, or their father or their mom, without even realizing, maybe she was a Rosie the Riveter in the shipyard. She might have smoked because everybody smoked in the shipyard back then. But
that's right.
Rosie's the Riveters, we've represented a lot of them. They were exposed just like anybody else working in the shipyards. So, but if they smoked anytime, first thing people will point to, cigarette smoking.
Michael, let's say the statute of limitations is 2 years, and somebody listening to this show in the state that they're in now says, wow, I wonder if my grandfather passed away. They said it was because of smoking. Is there any way for you to go back if it's under the statute of limitations?
Yeah, and there is, because oftentimes a statute, states really vary on the statute of limitations. Some are 1 year from date of death. If it's 1 year from date of death and they died 2 years ago, we're going to have a tough time if their only exposure was in that state. But what we've learned about asbestos victims, one, is that they were very transient. They were oftentimes, maybe if they were working at construction sites, they might have helped build a power plant in California and then Washington. So in situations where individuals worked in multiple states and were exposed in multiple states, you can investigate the different statutes from those states. So maybe if it's even more than 2 years. Here's the bigger one, though. Oftentimes, a statute of limitations will read, the statute of limitations runs 3 years from the date of diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease. Well, let's say somebody died even 4 years ago of lung cancer. Well, that's more than 3 years, right? That's 4 years. But wait a minute. The statute says if they died of an asbestos-related disease. Well, even though it's been 4 years since they died, nobody's ever diagnosed them with an asbestos-related disease. They've diagnosed them with maybe lung cancer,
Right.
but not lung cancer caused by asbestos, an asbestos-related disease. So in a case like that, say somebody even died 4 years ago of lung cancer, and the state's 3 years, I will investigate that case, and if I can determine that it was an asbestos-related disease, I will send it to an expert, a doctor, who will write a report that says, based on my investigation, Mr. So-and-so had lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos. And say he writes that report today, May 7th, 2025. That's your date of diagnosis now. And I've now got a year in the 1 year states, 3 years in the other states. So if you're driving around and someone died 2, 3, 4 years ago, I don't want you to worry about what state or the statute of limitations. It's a case that still can be investigated, and you still may be entitled to compensation because nobody's ever diagnosed you or your family member with an asbestos-related disease, unless it's mesothelioma. That, by definition, is an asbestos disease. Someone had mesothelioma 5 years ago. We still may be able to get them a little bit of money from some asbestos trust funds, which have extended statutes. But other than that, you could not file a lawsuit for them because the statute of limitations would have run in a mesothelioma. Other diseases, no, we'll go back and investigate. And, I've gotten money for people who died 10 years ago because they weren't diagnosed with an asbestos disease.
We've got a couple of questions in. What about people who've worked around drywall?
Absolutely. And if they worked around drywall, the big exposures in drywall is there was asbestos in drywall, but the joint compound or the taping mud, how you seal, if you're a drywaller, you've got to seal those two pieces of drywall together. That taping mud was probably, or that joint compound, so it was a dry product mixed with water, applied to the seams, and then sanded. And when that stuff was sanded, there was millions of asbestos fibers flowing through the air. Also, what they call in the trades fire-rated drywall, meaning protection in case there is a fire. It is a thicker drywall, but it also had asbestos in it, which was a great insulator, of course, back in the day. So fire-rated drywall also had a lot of asbestos in it. And, I am familiar with and if somebody out there is listening, I'm familiar with all of these asbestos products, but I never actually saw it until yesterday. I've been in depositions probably 100 times where they ask about drywall exposures, and they talk about what's known as a tear strip. And I never really saw it or knew what it was until yesterday. But the tear strip, usually when you buy drywall, I didn't know this, it's two pieces of drywall stuck together by a tear strip. And on that tear strip is the name or the manufacturer of the drywall. And that's why in these depositions I was in, they always asked, did you see the tear strip? And what was the name on the tear strip? Whether it was Kaiser Gypsum, US Gypsum, Gold Bond, or one of these many drywall products. So the long answer to your question is, absolutely. If they worked with or around drywall and are having breathing problems or one of the many cancers that I mentioned, there is a very good chance that they would be eligible for compensation.
Okay, this is a great text. It said, I am really enjoying your show. This is the second time I've listened to your show. I wanted to ask this question so bad last time. Can you go into more detail about popcorn ceilings?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's amazing and it's probably been 10 years since I've done the research on this. Popcorn ceilings had a tremendous amount of asbestos in them. It was manufactured by a company that some of you may have heard of, W.R. Grace.
Yes.
Primarily in a town, Libby, Montana. And whoever that is out there who wrote in that question, I want you to type in after we get up about Libby, Montana and asbestos. So while manufacturing this popcorn ceiling product, that manufacturing plant happened to be on a large mountain, and the way the wind blew, basically the entire town of Libby, Montana got sick. All right, let's leave that aside. So that product was used throughout the country. Okay, I don't know if there is a listener out there over the age of 30 who has not lived in a home that had popcorn ceilings in them. And for those of you who don't know what they are, it kind of sounds like the name. It's kind of like if someone took like a paste and sort of just shot it up at the ceiling, and that's how these things were applied. Okay, and they were used and utilized extensively up until 1977. I even know that there's and I've got the website where there's 20 hotspots where these products were extensively delivered. I know one is Newark, California, close to me, and then used and utilized in the construction of homes and apartments literally throughout the country. Why they were used? A great insulator, one. Easy to apply because they were shot on with you used a hopper and a gun, they called it, to just shoot it on the ceiling. And some people considered it decorative as well back in the day, as opposed to the smooth ceilings. And they would even put some silver or some colorings in it and stuff. Unfortunately, not only was that product laced with asbestos, but it was incredibly dusty and has become I don't want to say a controversial product in my field, because W.R. Grace, like many asbestos companies, filed for bankruptcy and set up a trust fund purportedly to compensate victims who were exposed to this ceiling tile. W.R. Grace made other asbestos products as well, so I hesitate because it's questionable whether they are set up to compensate everybody. They also made this fireproofing that was used in thousands of skyscrapers around the country, including the World Trade Center, which I think we've talked about.
Yes.
Those popcorn ceilings, why they're so problematic is because once they're in, how do you get them out? How do you remove a popcorn ceiling? One option that you do have, I don't recommend it, but it is definitely an acceptable option, is what people do is they will, in essence, the term escapes me, but they will spray a coating over the popcorn, encapsulate it. They will encapsulate the popcorn ceiling. So if someone jumped up and touched that ceiling, or if you're carrying something that brushes against that ceiling, dust isn't going to rain all over you like it would as installed. If you live in a home where you can jump up and touch the ceiling and the dust comes down, it has not been encapsulated. That is essentially an original construction. The other option you have is to try and remove it, which is tremendously expensive, involves wetting down the area, scraping it, clearing out your home for, I don't know, a week, having special licensed asbestos abatement crews come in to remove it. And it is a very extensive project, to say the least. Now, can you imagine if you owned, an apartment complex that has 200 units? And every single one of them has it, even if it's got 8 units or 10 units. I mean, I would doubt that, like I said, there's a listener under the age of 35 that hasn't encountered it or seen it. I'm sure you're familiar with popcorn ceilings.
We have trucks, Michael, here in Florida that say popcorn removal. I mean, they're everywhere. I mean, it's huge down here. So if a person has this popcorn ceiling, I mean, should they at least go and be tested?
Well,
I mean, if they've lived there for 20 years or 25 years and they've been inhaling this.
Well, I would say the answer to that, I don't want to have every single thousands of people running to their doctors. Usually people who end up getting tested are people who start showing symptoms. If somebody was having some breathing problems and had lived there in that home for 20 years and, they had noticed that this ceiling was in essence delaminating or was friable, like, when they cleaned up, would they see dust coming from the ceiling? When they shut the door, would maybe a little dust, would they notice dust on the baseboards come from the ceilings and stuff like that? And I would say it would start more with symptoms. I mean, this product was in millions and millions and millions and millions of homes. So you'd have to think, we would hope that most people who lived in those homes, including myself, we would hope that we're never going to get sick. And, that's something that we should, I think anyone over the age of 45 should think about. You went to a school that had asbestos in it without question. The floor tiles, they also had these particle board walls oftentimes in these schools. You would see those popcorn ceilings oftentimes in some of the newer schools, the drywall in schools, the fireproofing, if it was a steel construct. So we all went to schools, we were all born in hospitals, and we all probably lived in homes that had asbestos in them. Thankfully, not everybody gets sick from exposure to asbestos, thankfully. And so, I would say most of our listeners, we all had some exposure at some time in our lives. I don't want people to live in fear, but, and I would say I don't want to say most, but 75% of our clients typically were a blue collar worker who maybe worked 25 years in the shipyard, But we have seen cases of people where it's very difficult to find where they were exposed. Maybe they were a school teacher, for example, their whole life. Or I had a case that we talked about before. Well, now I have a feeling I know where they were exposed, but before the science was there, we had a hairdresser. She was a 45-year-old hairdresser who had mesothelioma. That was a case where, and it's unfortunate because I still think about that case. It was very difficult to find out how they were exposed, and she had very little exposure during her lifetime. Looking back as a hairdresser, since that case, and really in the past 10 years, in the scientific community, as you've probably seen, we've developed that a number of talc-based products, such as Johnson & Johnson's baby powder, had asbestos in it. And I really think now, looking back, which was highly used by hairdressers, these talcs and brushes and stuff and powders, I almost
was that what the lawsuit? Was that what Johnson & Johnson's lawsuit was about? Was that about asbestos?
100%. And
Wow.
it's about, well, it causes a couple of different diseases. We've seen a cancer primarily in females, and of course the mesothelioma, because it's laced with asbestos. But yes, it's all about the Johnson & Johnson's asbestos-laden baby powder causing very significant and terminal cancers. And, it is very controversial, I will say. I know just today, as a matter of fact, I got an email that one of the great firms in my field got a $3 million verdict, which for them is probably a low verdict for a woman who was diagnosed with mesothelioma. And the verdict was against Johnson & Johnson,
Wow.
specifically for that reason. But on the flip side, Johnson & Johnson has been successful in defending these cases where they argue, hey, this individual's mesothelioma was not caused by our baby powder, but was caused by their exposure to asbestos through, in the home, in the school, by the family members, or maybe in their occupation. And we're able to prove that the mesothelioma was not due to. So Johnson & Johnson has been successful in some of those cases, and the lawyers in my field have been successful in some of those cases. And it is highly controversial, and it is ongoing, and you're going to see a lot about it in the news going forward.
Yes. What about, we just had someone write wanting to know about mold and mildew. Does that cause asbestos?
No, similar type of thing, though. It is an exposure in the home, but and I don't want to talk where I'm not educated, but it is a different type of disease and a different type of injury caused by mold and mildew. And one of the bigger problems with mold and mildew is I don't think there is a lot of options for removing it out of a home. So with mold and mildew cases that I have seen, oftentimes the damages are property damages. Like, say somebody sold somebody a home that had toxic mold in it, so now nobody can live in it. They have to, tear down the home. So it's a property damage case versus a personal injury case. Don't get me wrong, I have seen cases where they call it toxic mold for a reason. I just don't believe it is a terminal disease or as serious as asbestos, but two different diseases.
Let me get this one in. This is from Malibu. You know about the fires that we had here, and they keep telling us about they're still trying to get rid of so many different chemicals. Can any of these chemicals from the fire cause asbestos?
I am guaranteeing that in that dust and that debris, there is a tremendous amount of asbestos, which often happens in fires. That is one of the most toxic substances typically involved in the cleanup. These, as I've seen when there's fires, because we've had them, and for that writer, I'm really sorry for what you're going through. We've seen it here in Northern California as well. And they talk about a lot of different toxic substances, but it's the same sort of thing. Any of those homes built before 1980, they would have had asbestos in them. The newer homes, probably not. But a lot of those homes were built prior to 1980. And any of those homes would have had asbestos in it. And in that dust and debris is going to be, billions and billions of asbestos fibers. They don't, there are other highly toxic substances in there as well, and they just sort of group them all together. I think that's on your end, I would hope. All right, there we go.
What should people do? Anything? I mean, should they see a doctor? Is there anything? It doesn't sound like it's very preventative.
Not unless they are symptomatic. The big thing we see with victims of mesothelioma is they have trouble breathing. They go to the doctor. Maybe they get misdiagnosed. What is it? Pleural-C. But typically what we see is that their lung built up with fluid, or their abdomen, and then they have to drain that fluid out of the lung. Then their breathing typically improves. Okay? If that fluid builds up again, then we've got some significant issues that we are concerned about. And typically a doctor at that point will either order a biopsy or try and test the fluid to see if there is any tissue in the fluid itself that they have drained out of the lungs, to see if there is any malignancy.
Is this a pulmonologist, Michael? Is that the type of...
It always starts, yeah, usually that's right. You'll start with your general physician. They'll send you to a pulmonologist, exactly. And then the scary one is if you've got to go to an oncologist, a cancer doctor.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then very quickly as well, so that's meso lung cancer. The symptoms, coughing up a lot of phlegm, especially if there is blood, pain when breathing in the back and lower back that doesn't subside. Those are the typical type of symptoms. Same with asbestosis, a lot of phlegm, coughing, walking upstairs, inability to catch your breath. That's the one you hear a lot. Typically, if it's not from asbestos, okay, I get tired, and then you get to the top and you catch your breath. They cannot catch their breath. It's very difficult once they lose their breath. That's something I hear a lot. So those are the three things. I know we're running short on time, Steve,
yeah,
but I wanted to...
This show goes by so fast, but we will be running it again next week. Michael will be back again with this next month. It's his live show. Michael, I tell you, this is such an important show, and I in a way, I kind of feel bad for the kind of your clients that you don't get to have a long-term relationship with them. And you've got the right heart for this area of law, and we so appreciate you. Tell people how they can reach you.
Sure. 1-800-970-DUST, D-U-S-T. My direct cell phone number I like to give out as well. Feel free to call me, 415-307-2119. My website is mesothelioma.pro. And time always flies with you, Steve. So thanks again for all your time. And I look forward to
Michael.
Talking to you next month.
We'll see you next month. It's Michael Mandelbrot. I am so glad we have his show. He'll be back again with us next month, and we'll be back with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.